That cow's illegal! Karen screeched, pointing one trembling finger at Buttercup as if the poor animal had just robbed a bank. Sheriff Clyde, halfway through chewing his sandwich, looked at the cow, then at Karen, then back at his sandwich and said, "Well, she sure don't look like a criminal. Though I'd arrest anyone who tried taking my lunch away." Buttercup blinked slowly and let out a long, bored moo, as if unimpressed with the accusations. And that's how my peaceful life on the ranch officially ended, with a hysterical HOA enforcer screaming about cows and a sheriff too entertained to take her seriously. I had only been on the ranch for 3 weeks. It was my Uncle Roy's place, left to me in his will, along with a ramshackle barn for goats, a rusted-out tractor, and one cow named Buttercup. I'd left city life behind for something slower, something with open skies, early sunrises, and the kind of silence you could feel in your bones. And for the most part, that's exactly what I got. Until Karen. She showed up unannounced on a Tuesday morning, clipboard in hand and tension in her jaw so tight it looked like she'd been clenching since 2009. She stood at the gate, which I'd just finished repainting, and blew a silver whistle like she was calling in troops. Buttercup, lazily chewing on some grass, glanced her way and then promptly laid down to resume her nap. That didn't sit well with Karen. "I am the HOA enforcement officer for this district," she declared, stepping over the boundary line without so much as a hello. "And this property is in direct violation of Subdivision Code 42. Unauthorized livestock within a suburban perimeter. This cow is illegal." I blinked. "Subdivision? This is a ranch. Technically, this land was folded into the Willow Creek HOA perimeter 2 years ago when your uncle failed to appeal the annexation notice. That makes you subject to all HOA bylaws, including livestock regulations." She tapped her clipboard like it was the word of God. I stared at her, trying to process what I just heard. "I don't even live in a subdivision. There's no pavement for a mile in either direction. Doesn't matter. Boundaries were redrawn. I have maps. Also, your barn roof is the wrong shade of red. It's considered hostile to the neighborhood palate." Buttercup mooed again, louder this time, as if mocking her. Karen's face twitched. She stepped back slightly, muttering something about disease risk and property values. I tried not to laugh. Buttercup was cleaner than most humans I knew. I hadn't dealt with an HOA before, but I'd heard the horror stories. Lawn too long? Fine. American flag at the wrong angle? Fine. Garden gnome slightly visible from the street? Fine. But this? This was a first. I explained to her, politely but firmly, that the cow wasn't going anywhere, and neither was I. She huffed, scribbled something violently onto her clipboard, and said, "You'll be hearing from us. That cow is a nuisance and a danger. If you don't remove her, we will." 2 hours later, Sheriff Clyde showed up. He knocked once, let himself in, and made a beeline to the back porch where I just poured a glass of iced tea. He wore his usual dusty tan hat, leather belt slung lazily around his hips, and a look that said he was either amused or halfway to retirement. Maybe both. "She come through here already?" he asked, settling into one of the rocking chairs. "If you mean a banshee with a badge and a clipboard, yeah? Just this morning." He chuckled. "Karen Delaney. Been running wild since the HOA gave her that laminated card and a walkie-talkie. Thinks she's the mayor of Willow Creek. She says Buttercup is illegal." He looked over at the cow, still dozing peacefully in the shade. "You mean that cow right there?" "That's the one." Clyde took a bite of his sandwich, chewed slowly, then stood up and walked over to the fence. Buttercup raised her head and trotted toward him like a dog greeting an old friend. He held out the other half of his sandwich. She sniffed, took it gently, and resumed chewing. "Well," he said, turning back to me, "if that's a criminal, then I'm a duck. So what do I do?" "Not much right now. Just don't let her bait you. She's bluffin'. I checked the county assessor's office. Your uncle never signed anything binding this land into HOA jurisdiction. They just drew up maps and hoped no one would notice. And the cow? Buttercup's stayin' right here. Don't worry. If she tries anything again, call me. He left with a promise to swing by later with some peach cobbler his wife had made, and I went back to painting the barn. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't done. She didn't seem like the kind of person who backed down when reason hit her in the face. She struck me as the type who doubled down, who escalated. That night, I walked the perimeter, checking the fences. I reinforced the gates and installed a motion light just outside the barn. Buttercup got an extra helping of oats, and a promise that no clipboard warrior was going to mess with her. Just after midnight I thought I heard something near the west gate. By the time I grabbed my flashlight and got out there, it was wide open. No sign of Karen, but there were tire tracks, fresh ones. Buttercup wasn't in her usual spot, and panic hit me like a hammer. I called her name like an idiot, not even sure cows responded to that sort of thing, but 5 minutes later I found her chewing on some daisies 2 properties over. She looked mildly annoyed that I interrupted her midnight snack. The next morning, Karen showed up again. This time with a citation, a warning notice, and a small crowd of clipboard-wielding neighbors behind her. Apparently, she had whipped up a frenzy in the HOA newsletter about rogue livestock threatening community safety. One of the neighbors pointed at Buttercup and asked if she had rabies. I just stared at them, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Karen slapped the citation on my fence. Last warning? Either you remove that animal, or we will. Permanently. I looked at her, calm as I could manage, and said, If you so much as lay a finger on Buttercup, you'll be explaining yourself to the sheriff. Again. Then we'll see what your precious cow's worth to you. She snapped, spinning on her heel. I didn't know what she meant at the time. But I'd find out soon. And when I did, it would be the start of something much bigger than one cow. It would be the war between a clipboard and the countryside. And I wasn't planning to lose. The next morning felt too calm for comfort. The birds chirped like nothing had happened the night before, the sun came up slow and lazy over the ridge, and Buttercup stood exactly where I'd left her, chewing with her eyes half closed like she had the entire world figured out. But I didn't trust it. The way Karen had left yesterday, eyes flashing like she was planning a military strike, told me she wasn't done. And sure enough, I didn't even make it to breakfast before I heard the sound of grinding brakes at the end of the driveway. I looked up from my coffee to see a tow truck backing in, slowly, like it was sneaking up on something. Right behind it, wearing neon orange like she was leading a roadside cleanup crew, was Karen. I stepped onto the porch just as the driver killed the engine. He climbed down, confused, looking from me to Karen like he just realized he was missing some context. Karen wasted no time. She marched right up to the tow truck driver, handed him a piece of paper, and pointed at Buttercup. There's the animal, she barked. I want her gone. The driver scratched his head and looked at me. You want me to move the cow? That cow is in violation of Willow Creek subdivision ordinances, she said, practically spitting the words. I have a seizure notice. He refused to comply. This is your job. The driver looked at the paper. This ain't a livestock transport job. I don't even have a trailer for an animal. Then tow the pen. I don't care. Just remove the animal from the premises. Immediately. I walked down the steps slowly, not sure if I was still dreaming. You're actually serious? Karen turned to me, jaw clenched so tight her temples pulsed. You were warned. Now I'm taking action. The tow truck guy handed the paper back to her. Ma'am, I ain't getting in a legal mess over a cow. You want her gone, you need animal control or a proper livestock trailer. I move cars. She looked like she wanted to throttle him. I was told this was enough. And I was told I'd be picking up a broken-down Ford, he said, climbing back into his truck. No one said nothing about livestock. Karen stood there fuming as the tow truck reversed, gravel crunching loudly in the silence. Buttercup flicked her tail lazily, as if the whole scene bored her. I figured that would be the end of it, but of course it wasn't. Karen wasn't going to let a little thing like common sense stop her. Exactly 40 minutes later, I saw flashing lights, only not the sheriff's cruiser. This time, it was Karen in a golf cart outfitted with red and blue plastic lights taped to the roof, rolling up the driveway like she was pulling over a gang of armed robbers. She had someone with her, too, some guy in a dollar store uniform with Special Marshal stitched above the breast pocket. He stepped off the cart like he was expecting a standoff. "I'm Marshal Rick Jenkins," he said, squinting into the sun. "This livestock is being detained per HOA Emergency Ordinance 12.3. I almost laughed. "Are you serious?" Karen crossed her arms. "He's deputized under HOA Code 16, Emergency Support Agents. That gives him full rights to enforce livestock seizure under subdivision laws. This isn't a subdivision. It's a ranch. And you made up those rules yesterday. They were approved in a special session. By who?" "Me. As acting president." Marshal Rick reached for his belt like he had a gun. Turned out it was just a flashlight and a rolled-up tape measure. I took a step closer, arms crossed. "You try to take my cow," I said. "You're gonna have a real law problem on your hands. You are obstructing a legal seizure." "No, I'm blocking a crazy HOA lady and her cosplay deputy from kidnapping my cow." Just then, like a gift from the heavens, a familiar pickup rolled up the drive. Sheriff Clyde stepped out, saw Rick's outfit, and stopped cold. Then he laughed. Not just a chuckle, but a deep belly laugh that echoed across the fields. He walked up to Karen slowly, nodding once at Buttercup, who seemed delighted to see him. "What's this now?" he asked, barely holding it together. Karen straightened her back. "We are enforcing Emergency Code 12.3. That cow is a threat to the neighborhood." "What neighborhood?" he asked, glancing around at the empty road, open fields, and the only other house being over a half-mile away. "This land is within HOA boundaries. Look, I have the maps." She pulled out a printed Google Maps screenshot with a red marker drawn around the property. Clyde took it, squinted at it, then flipped it over like maybe the real legal proof was on the back. Then he handed it back and said, "Karen, you brought your cousin in a Halloween uniform to try to steal a cow." "Enforce livestock removal," she corrected. He turned to Rick. "You a licensed marshal?" Rick looked nervous. "Well," she said, "that's a no. Get off the property." "But..." "Now." Rick didn't need to be told twice. He scurried back to the golf cart. Karen didn't move. Clyde stepped closer and dropped his voice. "You want to keep pushing this, go ahead. But next time I'm bringing real paperwork. And it won't be about cows. It'll be about impersonation, harassment, and trespassing. I'd suggest you leave before I start writing it all down." She stood there like she was considering whether the cow was worth getting arrested over. After a long pause, she spun around and marched back to the cart. Rick peeled out like it was a getaway car, and they vanished down the road. Afterward, Clyde walked over to Buttercup, gave her a scratch behind the ear, and looked at me. "I ever tell you I used to raise dairy calves? Smart creatures. Smarter than people give them credit for. Smarter than Karen? Son, she couldn't outweed a bag of feed." We stood there for a minute, just watching Buttercup flick flies with her tail and chew her cud. Clyde sipped his coffee and said he'd be back tomorrow with backup, just in case Karen got another bright idea. He wasn't wrong to be cautious. Because that night, I found the west gate open again. This time, the latch had been sawed off. Buttercup hadn't wandered far, but someone had tried harder. I fixed the gate, reinforced the fence, and made a silent vow. If Karen wanted a war over a cow, then that's exactly what she'd get. But she'd regret picking a fight with the one animal in the county more loved than any HOA rulebook ever written. It was just before sunrise when I spotted the first news sign nailed crooked to my fence. The paint was still wet, and it read in all caps, "HOA Livestock Violation Zone. Fines active. Removal order pending." It was signed simply with a looping K and a tiny drawn badge underneath like a kindergarten sketch of authority. Buttercup didn't seem to mind. She stood nearby, licking the dew off the grass like nothing in the world could bother her. I, on the other hand, was already reaching for my phone to call Sheriff Clyde when I noticed something else. A thick stack of papers left inside my mailbox, wrapped in plastic and marked Official HOA Notice, Emergency Rule Amendments. I carried the bundle into the kitchen and laid it out on the table. Each page looked freshly printed, the ink still smudging at the corners. Most of it was nonsense: zoning declarations, livestock height restrictions, and even one section that described cows as potential irritants to visual serenity. It was absurd. According to Karen's newest self-written addendum, any animal over 2 feet tall or producing more than 1 decibel of noise after 6 p.m. was now classified as a Class 2 aesthetic hazard. I flipped through the papers again, amazed at the sheer effort she'd put into justifying her crusade. Sheriff Clyde showed up 30 minutes later, fresh from his morning patrol and sipping on what looked like his third coffee of the day. He didn't even wait for me to hand him the documents. "She's been busy," he said, nodding at the papers. "You know she held a board meeting last night with no one else present? Filed her own minutes and everything. Voted herself in as HOA president again. That's the 3rd time this month. She really thinks she can pass fake laws and enforce them? She's trying," he said, flipping through the packet. "But there's no legal basis. These aren't ordinances. They're fantasy. The only thing official here is her signature, and even that's written like a 5-year-old learning cursive. She put up signs on my fence. Marked my land like it's condemned." He gave a low whistle and looked out the window. "I'll take them down myself if you want. But you'll probably need to expect more. Karen's convinced herself she's protecting the neighborhood from some grand threat. And unfortunately, she's got a few people listening." "Listening?" "Yeah. Heard from some folks near the edge of the HOA. Karen's been handing out newsletters, warning people about biohazardous livestock exposure and something she's calling a rural invasion plan. She's basically telling them your cow's part of a hostile takeover." I stared at him, trying to decide if I was still asleep. "A hostile cow takeover? She's persuasive when she wants to be. And dramatic. The HOA board doesn't want to touch it. Too messy. Too public. But the county zoning office might be a better bet." An hour later, we were sitting across from a zoning officer named Betsy Waller, who wore thick glasses, a serious ponytail, and an expression that said she'd rather be anywhere else. She looked through the paperwork Clyde handed over and frowned deeper with each page. "This isn't a legal HOA filing," she said flatly. "You can't unilaterally redraw property lines and declare livestock emergency zones without going through the county office. And you sure can't authorize enforcement agents who have no certification." "She dressed her cousin up as a marshal," I said. "He tried to arrest my cow." Betsy paused, then looked at Clyde. "Is that real?" "Was wearing a badge that said Special Moo Enforcement." There was a long silence, then Betsy sighed. "We'll issue a formal notice to her. If she continues, she'll be liable for impersonation, falsifying regulatory documentation, and harassment. I'll also file for a public hearing. If she shows up with any more fake laws, we'll shut it down." I walked out of the zoning office feeling hopeful, but that lasted all of 2 hours. When I got home, I found my mailbox filled with small flyers titled "Emergency HOA Vote." They were printed in red ink, and they all said the same thing. "Vote yes to remove unauthorized livestock and reclaim neighborhood tranquility." Karen had gone door to door in the nearby properties, spinning some twisted version of the truth where Buttercup was an environmental threat, a parasite magnet, and a crime magnet. She even claimed that coyotes had been spotted near the property because of the cow, which was a laugh considering Buttercup barely moved more than 20 feet in a day. That evening, Sheriff Clyde showed up again, this time with a cooler of sweet tea and some county records. "Found out something interesting," he said, spreading out a stack of old deeds on my kitchen table. "This ranch used to belong to Karen's ex-husband." I blinked. "You're serious?" "Yep. They got divorced 10 years ago. He sold the back half of the property to your uncle after the split. Word around town is that Karen never forgave him for that. She always thought she should have gotten the land. She's trying to reclaim it by making it unlivable. Exactly. She wants you off this land, and she's using every HOA loophole she can dream up to do it. Thing is, she's pushing too hard. Making mistakes. Drawing too much attention. We stood outside in the twilight as Buttercup ambled up to us, sniffing Clyde's boots before settling beside the porch. He reached down and patted her side. She's a good cow. Better behaved than most people. She's got a target on her back, I said. Well, then we'll just make her too famous to touch. I looked at him. What do you mean? Ever heard of the Fall County Fair? Biggest event of the year. We'll register her. Let folks meet her. Give her a blue ribbon or 3. Turn her into a public treasure. Karen won't be able to lay a finger on her without starting a riot. You're serious? As a heart attack. By morning, Buttercup had her own profile in the fair's online directory. Buttercup the Miracle Cow, defender of the ranch. Clyde took her picture himself, standing beside a handmade sign that read, Official Cow of Willow Creek. That same day, kids from the nearby town came by to meet her. I gave out free milkshakes. A group of teenagers took selfies with her. One girl dressed her in a flower crown. Karen showed up right at sunset, watched from across the road, and then drove away without saying a word. For the first time in days, I felt like we had the upper hand. But I knew Karen. She wouldn't take this loss lightly. No, she'd stew in it, let it boil, and return with something bigger, dumber, and even more desperate. And when she did, I'd be ready. Buttercup, too. After all, she was no ordinary cow anymore. She was a celebrity. And she wasn't going anywhere. 2 days after Buttercup's county fair profile went up, I stepped out to check the mailbox and found a manila envelope duct taped to the post. That alone was odd enough, but the return label on the back said, K. Delaney HOA Legal. I didn't even bother opening it right away. I'd seen enough of Karen's paperwork to know it would either be ridiculous, threatening, or both. But curiosity eventually got the better of me, and I unfolded the letter inside right there on the gravel driveway. It started with a bold heading that read, Official Livestock Nuisance Summons, Cow vs. HOA. I didn't understand it at first. Then I read the line below. Notice of civil suit filed against livestock property #R9, cow, alias Buttercup, for violations including disturbance of peace, failure to vacate upon notice, and unauthorized community engagement. I blinked. Karen had not only written up a lawsuit, she named the cow as the defendant. I laughed so hard I almost dropped the letter in the dirt. Buttercup, now apparently a rogue legal entity, was being sued in HOA court by name. Sheriff Clyde came by that afternoon, and I handed him the document without saying a word. He read it silently, lips twitching as he tried to keep his face straight. By the time he reached the third accusation, display of excessive cud chewing in open view, he lost it. He dropped into the porch chair, wiped tears from his eyes, and said, Son, I've been in law enforcement for 27 years, and this is the first time I've seen a cow get sued. She's out of her mind, I said. This is harassment. It's something, all right, Clyde replied. But it's also real enough that we gotta take it seriously. Technically, she filed it under the HOA's internal resolution system, which means she's trying to force a hearing. Let me guess. She's the judge? She listed herself as acting arbitrator in the attached bylaws. I sighed. So now Buttercup has to show up in court? She's pushing hard for it to be public, Clyde said. Already invited the local news. Sure enough, by the next morning, a local blog had published an article titled, Moo in Court, HOA Targets Beloved Cow. It included a photo of Buttercup wearing her flower crown from the fair. The story caught fire almost instantly. Comments flooded in, half of them mocking Karen, the other half pledging support for Buttercup. Someone started a hashtag Justice for Buttercup. Within a few hours, a local bakery offered to make themed cookies shaped like tiny cows. The county fair called and asked if Buttercup could appear early for a promotional video. I agreed on the spot. The following day, Clyde suggested we lean into it even more. Let's make her untouchable, he said. If Karen wants a spectacle, we'll give her one she can't control. So we planned a surprise. Saturday morning, just as the sun was rising, we set up a pop-up booth at the farmer's market. A banner above it read, "Meet the most controversial cow in Willow Creek." Kids gathered fast, and we gave out Buttercup stickers, milk cartons with her photo, and flyers inviting folks to attend the public hearing. But the real magic came when an old lady named Dot Simmons approached the booth and handed me a framed certificate. "I used to teach art and law," she said proudly, "and I hereby grant this cow honorary membership in the Willow Creek Historical Society." I looked at the paper. It had been signed, stamped, and sealed with a gold foil sticker. Buttercup, now an official member of local history, had just become a lot harder to get rid of. Later that afternoon, I got wind that Karen was planning something. One of the fair vendors, who'd overheard her talking in line at the gas station, told Clyde she was organizing an anti-livestock rally and bringing in a new round of signs, flyers, and possibly even an air horn. We laughed it off until the next morning, when I stepped out back and saw the evidence. Karen had trespassed again. This time she'd left laminated warning placards every 20 feet along the fence. But more shocking than that was the compost bin. I had one of those big rolling barrels behind the barn, mostly used for vegetable scraps and old hay. But someone, Karen or one of her cronies, had dumped what looked like a dozen bottles of synthetic perfume inside it. The entire thing reeked like a flaming floral nightmare. It was so strong it drove the chickens out of the coop. Buttercup sniffed it once, made a sound that could only be described as disgusted, and walked off shaking her head. Sheriff Clyde showed up 20 minutes later after I called it in. He took one whiff of the barrel, gagged, and said, "Well, that's chemical assault on compost if I've ever seen it." We hauled the barrel off with gloves and masks. Then Clyde did something I didn't expect. He turned back, looked at the barn, and said, "You got an old security camera in there?" "Still works," I said. "Why?" "Check it. I want proof. This time, we make it official." We watched the footage on an old monitor inside the barn. Sure enough, at around 2 a.m., a figure in a hoodie and cargo pants crept up to the compost barrel, popped the lid, and started pouring in bottle after bottle of something from a backpack. Then she stepped into the light for one brief second, and there was no mistaking the face. It was Karen, eyes wild, jaw clenched, and wearing her fake badge on a chain around her neck like it made the act legitimate. Clyde paused the footage. "Perfect. That's trespassing, destruction of property, and illegal dumping. I'm filing charges." "What happens now?" I asked. "We build the case, and we make sure the next time she sets foot on your land, she does it in handcuffs. As for the cow, you just keep feeding her like nothing's wrong." So that's what I did. Buttercup got a double helping of oats, and her favorite corn stalks. We even moved her pen closer to the road so the neighborhood could admire her more easily. People came by with gifts, salt licks, ribbons, even a blanket with her name embroidered on it. Someone brought a cowbell shaped like a heart. The fair organizers sent out an updated promo. "Buttercup the Brave," featuring Liv at the Fall Festival Parade. She'd gone from neighborhood cow to folk hero in less than a week. Meanwhile, Karen went quiet. No signs, no flyers, no visits. Which, frankly, scared me more than when she was screaming about bylaws. It meant she was planning something bigger, something sneaky. But now we had evidence, public support, and a sheriff who was as amused by this mess as he was determined to shut it down. What none of us knew yet was that Karen wasn't finished. In fact, she was about to make one more play, a last desperate move that would either get her everything she wanted or blow up so spectacularly, no HOA in the country would ever take her seriously again. Buttercup didn't know it yet, but she was about to face her greatest challenge. And oddly enough, so was I. I should have known something was up when I found a laminated map on my windshield with arrows pointing to my own barn like it was some kind of high-value target. The map was crudely labeled, "Operation Restore Order," and stamped in the corner was a red ink badge that read, "Karen D., Interim Commander, Livestock Recovery Division. I stared at it, speechless, then turned around and looked across the field. Buttercup was standing there with her head tilted, watching me like she expected an explanation. I didn't have one. By lunchtime, I heard the first signs of trouble. A low rumble rolled in from the road, and I stepped out onto the porch to see a convoy of golf carts crawling toward my property. Not just one or two, there were 5, each flying tiny HOA flags, each carrying someone wearing a homemade badge, and at the lead, like a suburban general, sat Karen. She had on mirrored sunglasses, a headset with a dangling mic, and what looked like a clipboard holster strapped to her thigh. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or call for backup. Buttercup watched the incoming caravan with a kind of disinterested judgment that only cows could pull off. Karen brought the carts to a halt just outside the fence line and stepped out like she was landing on foreign soil. "This is your final notice," she shouted. "In 10 minutes, we will be entering this property to conduct an emergency HOA livestock reassessment and perimeter neutralization." I walked down the driveway with my arms crossed. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means we are removing the unauthorized cow and restoring HOA-regulated order to this subdivision." "This isn't a subdivision," I said. "This is a ranch. And you're trespassing." Again. She ignored me and signaled to her group. They began unloading a variety of strange tools, measuring wheels, plastic fencing tape, even what looked like an air horn attached to a pole with duct tape. One of the women had a megaphone and was testing it by yelling, "Unauthorized livestock will be relocated in accordance with neighborhood beautification protocol." It was like watching a group of yard sale commandos prepare for a battle only they could see. I called Sheriff Clyde. He picked up on the first ring and said, "I'm already on my way." Someone posted a video of her planning this stunt in a Facebook group called Suburban Warriors. "You're about to have a front row seat to the dumbest siege in county history." While I waited, Karen and her team began lining up along the fence like they were about to perform synchronized marching drills. One of them tripped over a sprinkler head and went face first into a pile of grass clippings. Another accidentally activated the air horn and startled himself. Buttercup remained entirely still, chewing on a mouthful of hay as if none of this was her problem. Karen raised her arm and bellowed, "Move in!" They charged through the gate. Or tried to. The first 2 ran into the wire I'd reinforced with garden netting. They stumbled and tangled like amateur stuntmen. Another woman tripped over a chicken feeder and went down in a puff of feathers. Karen herself made it 10 feet in before stopping short, her nose wrinkling. That's when she hit the real surprise. I'd been composting for years and had a few barrels near the barn, but after her last perfume stunt, I'd gotten creative. Using soda bottles, baking soda, and a mix of expired cabbage and pig slurry, I'd rigged up a barrel that would burst a cloud of fermented vapor when disturbed. It wasn't dangerous, but it was revolting. Karen found it the hard way. She stepped on the rigged board and, pop, out came a cloud of odor so potent it knocked her HOA army into retreat before they'd even reached Buttercup's pen. There was a chorus of coughing, gagging, and one woman screaming, "It smells like a diaper in a microwave!" They fled the property like clowns from a collapsing circus tent, some of them vomiting into the grass, others tripping over their own carts as they tried to back out of the driveway. Then came the sirens. Sheriff Clyde's cruiser slid up next to the convoy of retreating carts, lights flashing. He stepped out, slow as ever, with a look on his face like he was trying not to grin too early. He took one long look at the mess, Karen trying to wave her papers in the air, her team coughing and scattered like dropped groceries, and then turned to me. "Is that smell what I think it is?" "Better," I said. "It's Karen's perfume, but made organic." He shook his head and walked over to her. "Karen Delaney," he said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "You are being cited for unlawful trespassing, attempted livestock theft, impersonating a regulatory official, and deploying unauthorized chemical agents on private property." Karen turned red, then purple. "You can't do this. I'm acting HOA president. I have immunity." "You have 5 citations and a fake badge," he replied. And this is the third formal complaint filed against you this month. That qualifies as criminal harassment. Her army tried to flee in their carts, but Clyde had already called in a deputy who blocked the exit. One by one, they were questioned, warned, and most of them quietly apologized as they were escorted off the property. Karen, on the other hand, was handcuffed, not roughly, but with enough finality to leave no room for doubt. She was still yelling about bylaws when Clyde put her in the back of the cruiser. Before he drove off, he looked back at me. We'll start the paperwork. This time it sticks. She'll be barred from entering this property again. About time. She'll probably try one last time, he said. But next time, she'll need a lawyer and a whole lot of apologies. After they left, the field was quiet again. Buttercup finally moved, walked right over to where Karen had dropped one of her signs, sniffed it, then laid down on top of it like she'd claimed victory. I walked over, gave her a scratch between the ears, and whispered, "You've got more fight in you than I ever expected." That night, I found a gift basket on the porch. No note, but it was filled with fresh bread, honey, and a hand-carved wooden sign that read, "Buttercup's Ranch, no Karens allowed." The town had made their stance clear. HOA or not, this cow wasn't going anywhere. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen had one more trick left. Something final, something dramatic. She wasn't the type to fade quietly. But now we had video evidence, community support, and the law on our side. Whatever she threw next, we'd be ready. Buttercup was more than just a cow now. She was a symbol. And not even Karen could change that. The day of the Fall County Fair arrived under a sky so blue it looked almost painted. Buttercup had been brushed, bathed, and ribboned up like royalty. I never thought I'd spend hours styling a cow, but at that point, she wasn't just a cow, she was the face of a movement, the peaceful champion of a battle against absurd authority, and whether she knew it or not, the star of the show. We loaded her into a trailer decorated with flowers, posters, and a hand-painted sign from the neighbor kids that read, "Buttercup for President." I wasn't sure if they meant the HOA or the country, but either way, it felt right. Sheriff Clyde met us at the gate of the fairgrounds. He had 2 deputies with him and a clipboard of his own, but unlike Karen's, this one actually meant something. He gave Buttercup a wave like she was an old friend, then nodded to me. "You've got fans lined up already. I'd stay close. Heard some folks from the city council are coming out. Might be more eyes than expected." Buttercup's booth was front and center in the livestock pavilion, and the moment we opened the trailer, a crowd formed. Kids with balloons ran up to the fence, parents took photos, and someone handed me a tote bag with Buttercup's face on it. I didn't even know they made those. One booth was selling cow-shaped cookies, another had shirts that said, "Moo means no, to the HOA." I couldn't stop smiling. After all the chaos, the threats, the insane golf cart brigade, here was the proof that Karen had lost. Buttercup wasn't just accepted, she was adored. But of course, the story wasn't over. I spotted Karen lurking near the parking lot around noon. She wasn't in uniform this time, no fake badge, no clipboard, just sunglasses, a scarf pulled low over her face, and a posture that screamed defeat mixed with simmering rage. I watched as she crept between booths, ducking behind hay bales and food stands, whispering furiously into her phone. Clyde noticed her at the same time I did. He let out a soft whistle and nodded toward her. "She's not supposed to be here. Technically banned from any event involving your property. You want me to walk her out?" "Nope," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. "We'll let her walk herself out." He pulled out a folded legal notice. It was an emergency restraining order, fast-tracked, signed by a judge the night before, and officially filed that morning. It prohibited Karen from coming within 500 feet of Buttercup, me, or any part of the fairground where we were registered. Clyde made his way through the crowd, smooth and calm, until he was standing right in front of her. The moment Karen saw him, she froze like a cat under a spotlight. He handed her the notice without a word. She read it in silence, her hands trembling. I couldn't hear what she said, but from the expression on her face, she wasn't just angry, she was wounded. She tore the paper in half, dropped it in the dirt, and walked away, shoulders stiff, defeated. I didn't follow. I didn't have to. It was over. Or so I thought. About an hour later, as the sun reached its highest point and the fair buzzed with music and laughter, a disturbance rippled through the livestock area. People began shouting. Someone screamed. I rushed around the corner of Buttercup's pen just in time to see the latch swinging open and the gate wide. Buttercup was gone. I looked toward the back of the pavilion and saw a flash of blue, a tarp-covered trailer speeding away, weaving between tents and food trucks. I didn't hesitate. I jumped into Clyde's truck, which he'd parked behind the pavilion, and slammed the door just as he tossed me the keys. "Go get her," he said, already on the radio calling for backup. I gunned it out of the fairgrounds, tires squealing across the gravel. The trailer was fast, but it wasn't built for speed. I followed the dust cloud it left behind down the service road, through an open gate, and onto a narrow back path behind the old mill. I spotted it fishtailing on a bend, then straightening as it roared toward the creek bridge. That's when I recognized the license plate. It was Karen's cousin, the same fake marshal who'd tried to tow the cow 3 chapters of madness ago. He wasn't wearing the costume now, just a ball cap and panic on his face. He spotted me in the rear view and sped up. We hit the bridge at the same time. He tried to swerve. The trailer clipped the railing and tilted. It wasn't a full crash, more like a forced stop. Buttercup, bless her, had braced herself. I jumped out of the truck, climbed into the back of the trailer, and found her standing calmly like nothing had happened. She gave me a gentle nudge with her head, as if to say, "You again?" Behind me, the driver stumbled out, holding his hands up. "It was Karen!" he shouted before I could even say a word. "She said it was a joke. She said we'd return the cow after the fair, just wanted to prove a point." Clyde arrived a minute later. The other deputies weren't far behind. The man was arrested on the spot. As for Karen, she was nowhere to be found. Disappeared again. But this time, it didn't matter. With the failed kidnapping caught on half a dozen fairgoers' phones, she was done. The footage was shared before we even got Buttercup back to her pen. News stations picked it up. Reporters asked for interviews. Someone even offered Buttercup a serial sponsorship, which we politely declined. That night, as fireworks cracked across the sky and music played from the fairground's main stage, Buttercup lay peacefully in her pen, ribbon fluttering on her halter. I sat beside her, tired but content. The crowd was thinning, the chaos had passed, and for once, everything was still. Clyde walked over with a funnel cake in one hand and a paper plate in the other. "Guess she earned it," he said, setting the funnel cake down in front of Buttercup. "She's gonna expect this every year now." He laughed. "Maybe she should. She's got more fans than the mayor." We stood in silence a while longer, just watching the stars come out. Buttercup dozed off. A kid in a cowboy hat waved goodnight. And as the fair slowly packed up and faded into memory, one thing became clear: no matter what rules Karen tried to invent, no matter what plans she cooked up, she would never take this land, this peace, or this cow. Buttercup had won. Not just the ribbon. Not just the crowd. She had won the right to be left alone. And in a world full of noise, that might be the biggest victory of all.